TVC News. Wherever the big news story is happening, we're geared up to break it. TVC News, first with breaking news.
Hello everyone and welcome this morning, compliments of the season to you. In less than 48 hours, we will be ushering the brand new 2021. Well, 2020 has been quite an unprecedented year for many, given the global health challenge. And if you take a closer look at home, there's been a lot of issues around security and many other matters arising. And we're still reviewing the events that shaped 2020. I'm joined this morning by an health expert. In the course of the show, we're going to be bringing him on to talk about the second wave of the coronavirus. Executive Director, Health Emergency Initiative, Pascal Achunian. Good morning and thank you for coming this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So,
compliments of the season.
Yes, about that. How has Christmas been? I mean, how was it for you?
Exciting, but unusual.
Unusual.
Yes,
and that's one word that
departure
I've
from
heard.
the usual.
Even though you're not looking it at all. I mean, you look like you had a wonderful Christmas holiday.
Thank you.
Let's turn our attention to Abuja to start with, as we look at the issues surrounding security, health, and education. I'm joined by the Senate spokesperson, Dr. Ajibola Bashiru. Good morning, Dr. Bashiru. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm fine.
All right, thank you for joining us. Congratulations on the empowerment program you had earlier. We saw reports of 600 people in your constituency being empowered, and we're looking forward to see how many other programs like that will also emanate, especially across board and indeed across the nation. It's been an unprecedented year for many Nigerians. I want us to begin with the issue of security, Dr. Bashiru. The attack on farm workers where dozens were killed, the abduction of boys in Kankara happened in the last 2 months of the year. But each month of 2020 has had its fair share of insecurity, call it kidnappings, armed banditry, and the list is long. How do you personally assess security in Nigeria in the outgoing year?
I think the issue of security is one of the major challenge of the ongoing year. And at the National Assembly, it has been a major preoccupation at the plenary and at several committee level. I will say that in the past 1 year, if the issue of security had not been considered at the Senate, it has been considered at least about 8 or 10 times. And when it comes to this issue of security, I think it called to task the need for us to relook at the security architecture in our country. And that has been the consistent call by the Nigerian Senate. In the first instance, on February 17, 2020, even before the lockdown, there was a committee, a summit on security, which was headed by the majority leader in the Senate, and the report was presented at the plenary. The highlight of the report goes to issue of decentralization, budgetally and operationally of the Nigerian police. Those resolutions are still alive and largely are yet to be implemented. And that was why after the Kankara kidnapping, the Nigerian Senate had to restate the resolutions on the need for us to look at security architecture, particularly in terms of decentralization of the police. And added to this is also the lingering debate about necessity otherwise of state police. Personally, as a senator, I've sponsored a bill which is already past second reading and before constitutional review on the need to look at putting in place state police. And the argument has always been that state police will allow possible oppression by some governor. But when you look at the scale of insecurity, the question would be, is it not better to deal with the issue of possible abuse of police separately, which I believe all over the world can be tackled by rule of law, independence of judiciary and the separation, of power. But the question of security is very paramount to the extent that under our Constitution, Section 14(2)(b), it is stated that security and welfare of the people is the paramount purpose of government. And the security also has dimension beyond policing. You also have an ongoing insurrection and insurgency and banditry activity, particularly in the northeast, banditry, in the northwest. This also calls to question the need for capacity development in terms of our military, and also call into question the need for more transparency into what resources that have been allocated and to what extent these resources are being used. And then if there are needs to make adjustment in terms of the structure. And of course, I will reiterate the often call by the Senate that there's a need for the president to look at the existing tenure of the security chief. And one of the issues that came forward at the plenary was that there may be a need to even look at our constitution closely and give the National Assembly some role in terms of hiring and firing of service chiefs, so that the existing lacuna by which we appear to be reliant on advisory role that we can play will be reduced.
Absolutely, Dr. Bashiru. We have had quite a number of these fantastic ideas, motions moved on the floor of the Senate. The challenge with many Nigerians, I want to assume, is implementation. And when you talked about the need to perhaps change hands for the service chiefs that have been there for close to 6 years now, if not more, I'm just going to remind you of some of the issues that we had in 2020. We saw the president this year turn down an invitation by the House of Reps to address some of these issues that you have raised and what his administration is doing to fight insecurity. I understand very clearly what the position of Senate is, and you in particular, the spokesperson, identifying earlier that this was not the idea of senators, and it was all about members of the House of Reps, and they might have to be the one to answer questions in this regard. But we have also heard that party leaders, including governors and lawmakers like you, were the one who opposed the House summon and even prevailed on the president not to appear. What personally do you think, what do you make of the president's sudden change of mind to address these matters with a joint session of the National Assembly?
I think first and foremost, I must correct the impression that I or any other person in the leadership or membership of the Nigerian Senate prevail on the president not to honor the invitation of the House of Representatives. The clarification I made was that when issue was raised as to whether National Assembly had invited the president, my response is that we are not invited because we have a bicameral legislative arm. And of course, there have been a lot of interesting debates as to whether the House of Rep or by extension, the Senate have the power to summon or invite the president. And in this regard, is a matter that is very at large among constitutional lawyers. There's a forum of Nigerian lawyers, which I'm a member, and I see that there have been very serious, rigorous debate and controversy one way or the other by leading legal practitioners in Nigeria. The question is, invitation appear to be something that will be honored by way of courtesy. By the president. When it comes to summon, then you are talking of coercive authority. So it is debatable whether in view of Section 318 or so on the immunity of Mr. President, whether it can be amenable to coercive authority even within the context of investigative power of the National Assembly. The issue also as to security, and you will know that over time in constitutional jurisprudence, the issue of national security and the issue of public interest and the question of fundamental right, it has been a question of serious theoretical disputation, which I think that was why the Senate would not want to get herself involved. But at the level of leadership of the Senate, we are constantly meeting with the presidency, particularly the president, to be able to to discuss and put our ideas on how security issues will be resolved. And at the level of the various committee, for instance, I'm a member of the Committee on the Air Force. We have carried out our oversight function by visiting the leadership of the Air Force and also going to strategic installations where we have been able to interact with the men and officers as to our own idea on how to be gone. Those are matters that we cannot discuss. The challenges and what are the issues is not what you can go and be debating on national television or in the full glare of the public. All of us are aware as to sensitivity of issue of security. So I think it is rather not in the interest of the country to politicize issue of security. Are you going to be discussing challenges as to possible shortage of manpower, as to possible shortage, possible issue of sabotage, and so on and so forth? So the issue of security is very sensitive, but just as I said, it must be taken seriously by all concerned. You cannot have a country that issue of security is taken with levity. It would be a sign, just as I said at the plenary, that we are not being alive to our constitutional responsibility of safeguarding the security and welfare of the people, which is clearly provided in Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution.
I like the fact that you highlighted the issue of constant conversation between the lawmakers and the executive, because the people, if you pay attention to the news and social media, have expressed some anger and indignation at government's failure to stop the bloodshed despite repeated promises. You speak for the Senate, which I believe is a legislative arm of government. Will you share, and when I say you, I'm talking about senators and lawmakers, will you share in this blame and take responsibility for how security has deteriorated in Nigeria?
Of course, with all sense of responsibility, we all swore, including the President and members of the National Assembly, to uphold the Constitution. I will say, with all sense of responsibility and in deference to our oath to the Constitution, that we are equally, are responsible if there are challenges of security. You will know that our senators were elected by a constituent. Some senators, with respect, cannot even go back to their constituent because of the problem of insecurity. So I will not hide from the fact that, yes, we share responsibility, but issue of tackling security, particularly insurrection, the one that we have in Nigeria that has an international dimension, needing collaboration among other countries like Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, and also that involve international and global terrorism as extending within the context of sub-Saharan Africa up to Asia and the Middle East is one thing that is very challenging. And when you know the pattern of such kind of insurrection, is usually to look at soft target. And that is why, concomitant with the battle against the insurgents, we are also talking of improving the capacity of local policing, which would allow us to be able to detect more. And that's why during this year, if not for the COVID that had affected implementation of the new Police Act, for more than 5 or 6 decades, we are able to, at the present National Assembly, come up with the amendment of the Police Act, which play emphasis on issue of community policing, training, and of course, using constabulary method to ensure that policing get closer to the people and to the community. Unfortunately, because of the challenge of COVID, that might have affected the executive in implementing the new and novel provision of the Police Act. So, in as much as we accept this responsibility, we are not resting on our ass, and that is why we have been taking legislative action and coming up with useful suggestions as to tackling the issue of insecurity.
So the popular perception, Dr. Bashiru, is that you don't do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. How much impact are these suggestions making with the executive? Because the feeling out there is some sort of an adamant to change attitude on the part of the presidency, and particularly I'm talking about the strategy. You mentioned the service chiefs. There's been an outcry to change hands, to try new ideas, and so is the case with many other issues, you know, around this administration. Would you say that the suggestions are being heard and are being considered? And as a party member who should be concerned, what are lawmakers doing about it?
I think I must first make a clarification. There's a need to come clear as to what are the other issues. Yes, on the issue of security and the issue of the tenure of service chief, I will say that there is appear to be misunderstanding and lack of unanimity on the part of the National Assembly and the executive. But on other issues that you made as an omnibus issues, I'm not aware. I know that there has been a very, robust, relationship in terms of coming up with programs and activities that will enhance our economy and that will also facilitate progress. On the issue of national security, we must be able to clearly articulate what is the role of the legislature and what is the role of the executive. Our role is in Section 4 of the Constitution, and it basically to make law for the good order of the country, and of course specific provisions in terms of appropriation. I will say that as much as possible, the National Assembly has been able to come up with relevant legislation to support the issue of insecurity, just as I mentioned, the issue of the Police Act. In terms of appropriation, we have also engaged with the executive to ensure that adequate appropriation, both main and supplemental, are made in order to be able to ensure that the war against insurgency and, of course, the tackling of the challenges in the Northeast is also not properly appropriated for in terms of making finances. I know extreme people will say that a National Assembly ought to, for instance, mention that we should sanction the president. Of course, the question of sanction is not only legal, it's also political, and it also has to be looked within the general stability of the country. We are statesmen at the National Assembly, and of course we're elected by people. While we continue to set the position of our people, we believe that the executive, within the constraints that they may have, which we may not know, they will be able to know that we are not just speaking as individuals, but we are speaking as authentic representative of the Nigerian people.
On top of the pandemic this year was the NSAS protest that did not only demoralize the police, but also wreaked havoc economically across the country. Some said we have learned two lessons. One, that we cannot do without the police, and just have seen how vulnerable the Nigeria police force is. What's being done about this? And do you think that this is marking the end of an era at the beginning of a new change as regards the quality of police personnel and service that has been rendered in this country?
As I told you, even before the NSAS protest, the National Assembly had enacted a new police act with a view to reforming the Nigerian police. But unfortunately, shortly after the act was passed was when the COVID lockdown came, and of course the NSAS. So perhaps if we had not had the misfortune of the lockdown of COVID-19 and of course the effect on governance in the country this year, possibly even before the NSAS protest would have come up, the issue of the reforming of the Nigerian police in accordance with the new Police Act could have been put on board. And of course, you see that over and over a period of time, the real issue with the NSAS is a question of failure of rule of law, and also impact on even the effectiveness of our judiciary to serve as the bulwark against possible abuse of police authority or any other form of authority. In the world all over, there's always the propensity for any arm-wielding organizations to seek to harass, to oppress, victimize, and unlawfully arrest. So we need pari passu with the issue of the police reform. We need to strengthen judiciary, expeditious determination of cases, and proper staffing with adequate resources to be able to ensure that, yes, there will be propensity to abuse power. There must be the bulwark against that abuse, which is rule of law and independence of judiciary. So I will say that one of the key things which I believe is that we need to do more in terms of our policing. We need to go back to state police, we need to go back to community policing, and we let people in the society also participate actively in securing themselves. And it is in this context that you can have a synergy between the community and the police that is securing that community. The moment there is suspicion, there is lack of trust on part of the government and the government and those that are supposed to police the society, there will definitely be challenges in being able to have necessary cooperation, necessary synergy to ensure there's effective enforcement of our laws.
There's a lot to talk about, Dr. Bashiru, but let's quickly touch on education. We had perhaps the longest industrial action in Nigeria's history since 1999. Our universities were shut down for 9 months. Well, thankfully, ASU says it has conditionally suspended the strike, and we are hoping that, all things being equal, government will not renege on its promise this time. I think they're reviewing this agreement by February next year. But we cannot begin to quantify how much impact that has had negatively on our economy, not to talk about the time that has been lost on the part of students. In October, a resolution was made on the floor of the Senate, and the Senate president was asked to interfere and talk with the two parties. Now that ASU says this is a conditional suspension based on what happens in the coming months, how do we assure that this is not something that repeats itself in the new year?
I will say that in line with the resolution of the Senate, the Senate President and leadership of the Senate actually met with ASU, and they laid the building blocks for what eventually resolve the matter. For instance, the Senate position is that both sides cannot have 100% position and expect the country to move forward. One of the issues in relation to the salary rollouts and the necessary software was considered. So the first thing that actually taught the eyes between ASU and the executive is actually the brokerage that was done by the leadership of the National Assembly under the chairmanship of Dr. Ahmed Lawal. And of course, I would say that it's most unfortunate that the basis of manpower development in our country had to suffer so much on this matter. And I think it is rather not so much of a challenge for National Legislature, because as much as possible, all requisition that has been made in terms of financing and in terms of appropriation had been acceded to by the National Assembly. And I think some of the issues raised by ASU and some of the contention of the federal government goes to the root on the need for us to reform our educational sector. I will say personally, I'm not impressed even with the resumption of ASU, with the continuation of education. For us to develop in this country economically, we need to look at the curriculum and look at the relevance of many of the courses that are being taught in our university. We need to go back to productive education that is calculated and training our people to be active participants in our economy.
Let me just chip this in very quickly. I've interviewed quite a number of people, and I've heard some say the way to make this work is to have every senator's child attend Nigerian universities and ensure that all of our government officials do not leave this country when they are sick, and then perhaps that would expedite action in this regard. But I want to quickly turn your attention to the money issue, because it is central to the issue that ASU has had with federal government over the years. We're told that the budget for 2021 perhaps has the lowest for education in 10 years. The troubled sector is receiving a meager 5.6% of the total budget, which is much below the recommended benchmark. How optimistic are you, given how much we have earmarked for education in the coming year?
I think it's very important to first correct the wrong impression. I think those that make allegations that National Assembly members send their children abroad should come up with their facts and figure as to those. For now, I'm a senator of Federal Republic. I've served, I'm in my state, Osun, in capacity as a 2-term commissioner. I've never received any medical treatment abroad, and presently I don't have any child that is schooling, abroad. All my children are with me in Nigeria here. But that is beside the case. The fact that you're a senator does not mean you might not have professionally developed yourself and have the necessary financial muscle to sponsor your children to anywhere, in the world. So the question of whether you have child in the country or you don't have child in the country, it begs the issue of commitment to our constitutional responsibility to serve the people and ensure that they are entitled, they get the entitlement to education. So I think those are just aside the issue. Then on the question of budgeting, I think the budget for education should not just be seen as to what is allocated to the Ministry of Education. TED Fund is an integral part of how education is funded in Nigeria, and they have a lot of resources which is devoted to development of infrastructure in our tertiary institutions. You should also know that education is a concurrent matter. So if you want to look at the totality of envelope that is available in terms of allocation to education in Nigeria, you have to also aggregate what has been allocated in the 36 states, including to an FCT to education. So it's not just take what the National Assembly has allocated to education as the totality of what goes to education, in the country. This is definitely a far cry from what actually goes to education when you take into cognizance the budget of the state and of course the local government in terms of funding local education. You also know that UBEC is also an integral part of education sector, and also the PTDF and some other specialized agencies that look into specialized areas of education. So in coming up with the totality of what goes into education is not just what goes to the Ministry of Education.
But all of these other means you have mentioned are not new channels. They've been there since, and yet we're still reporting that the education sector has been poorly funded in the past years, falling below the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization recommendation. Out of, if I get the figures right, out of the estimated 13.08 trillion naira budgeted for next year, 742.5 billion naira was allotted for education. But let's move on because of time to touch, because you have mentioned the 2021 budget. And in keeping with the new tradition of the January to December cycle, we expect the president to assent to the past appropriation bill in a matter of hours, if not in a matter of days, if not hours. Kudos to the Senate and the House of Reps who have made this happen. But how optimistic are you that the 2021 budget will really address the challenges, the economic challenges that befell us in 2020?
I think the 2021 appropriation, which has been passed by the National Assembly, is a way forward in being able to tackle the challenge that we have in terms of governing our economy. You will discover that the proposal that was brought by the executive in terms of capital expenditure was 3.6 trillion, but the National Assembly added half a trillion to it to make the capital expenditure to be 4.1 trillion. You will also discover that part of the challenge that we face is in terms of the effect of COVID-19 on international oil market, by which the benchmark for the crude oil price has to be pegged at $40 per barrel and at an estimated 1.6 million barrel per day. But you will discover that as at the point that we are passing the appropriation, we noted that the price of crude in the general market has now gone beyond the threshold of $40 per barrel, and we express that we expect the executive to bring supplementary appropriation to be able to engage more in capital expenditure to galvanize and stimulate the economy, and ensuring that we're able to get out of the current recession within the first quarter of 2021. So we believe that the latitude that we now have in being able to supplementarily carry out additional capital expenditure will assist in getting the country out of the current recession. But of course, I must mention this with all sense of responsibility that there is still a need for us to address the issue of cost of governance if we're able to move our country forward. When you look at the budget, about 5.2 or 5.4 trillion is going to non-debt recurrent expenditure. Another 3.2 trillion is going to debt servicing, which means that a large chunk of our national resources is going to debt recurrent expenditure and non-debt recurrent expenditure. It will get to a point that we need to address the ministries, departments, and agencies of government, streamline them, and ensuring that the personnel and overhead is actually tailored to ensure that we have a situation that the investment in capital expenditure will exceed that of the recurrent expenditure. And I think some states in the country, for instance, my state in Osun, has gone along that line, by which you will see that out of the present budget put forward by the Osun State government, 46% is going to recurrent expenditure,
Absolutely.
whereas 54% is going to capital expenditure. So I think these are the way by which you can be thinking at the national level to ensure that we have more resources for capital expenditure.
If states can do it, then we can do it on a national level. Dr. Bashiru, please, let's take a commercial break now. I'll be back with one or two more questions for you. Thank you for standing by. We'll take a break and return. Don't go away.
At TVC News, wherever the big news story is happening, we're geared up to break it. TVC News, first with breaking news. At TVC News, wherever the big news story is happening, we're geared up to break it. TVC News, first with breaking news.
Dr. Ajibola Bashiru, spokesperson for the Senate, is our guest this morning. Thank you for staying the course on the program. Well, I'm going to assume that you're hearing me, Dr. Bashiru. We have to go now. I'm just going to ask you one last question about the politics of palliatives. It's been a challenging year for not only Nigeria, but the world. Many are concerned about what government has done as form of palliatives. You saw the news and you saw the reaction of Nigerians. What is being done to ensure that subsequently all of these things will actually trickle down to those who need them the most? It's appearing that there's a systemic error that just, frustrates efforts of government in this regard.
I think what I would say is that just like the name of the pandemic itself, they call it novel coronavirus, is also novel for us as a government and the people all over the world to get prepared to be able to serve a palliative along the line that have been done. And as you know, there is a combination of effort by the government and also private sector. Just like I've been explained by the COVID coalition, the assumption was that everything that is supposed to be distributed ought to have been ready before distribution. Unfortunately, with the NSAS protest and of course sabotage on the part of the hoodlum, many of the items were looted and could not get to where it has gone. And of course, one of the challenge that the government is facing, and which I think the seriousness that we're attaching to the national identity number will resolve is in being able to get necessary data for planning and to be able to know where those resources will be done. Like from my own experience in my own senatorial district, we are challenged because we cannot reach across to every body. We don't have that kind of resources. We have to set up a a desk where people can call in with verified claim and then reach out to those who are really vulnerable in society. But what you discover in the country is that there appear to be a sense of entitlement even on the part of those who ought to even as a charity give out to say that they must just collect because it is coming from the government. So in terms of cultural reorientation and in terms of logistics and in terms of data, there's a need for improvement along humanitarian and relief effort on the part of the government and also on the part of the private sector intervention in alleviating poverty and misery such as occurred under the COVID-19 lockdown.
Senator representing Osun Central Senatorial District under the platform of the ruling All Progressives Congress is also a spokesperson for the Senate, Dr. Surajuddin Ajibola Bashiru. Thank you so much for spending time with us on the program this morning.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, too.
All right, let's turn our attention back to the studio. It's been a very interesting year. I have a guest in the studio who brought sanitizers. He's been sanitizing us this morning and even brought face masks and all of that. They say that's the new normal. He's a public health expert, Pascal Chune. Thank you very much for staying the course on the program. So what is this thing about the second wave? Many people had anticipated that Corona has gone. I mean, not even many believe in Corona in the first place. So what is this thing? Help us break it down and help people understand the concept of a second wave in this pandemic.
It's interesting to say that it was the word prediction. It was predicted that there might be a second wave. And some people also assume that Corona has gone.
That's right.
The way it is described in Nigeria is Corona is no more. But typically, we have seen from the experience in the last 9-10 months that science has some limitation. So this took the world unawares. And it did not start here, but we had opportunity of probably limiting the spread. And it was here for about 6 months intensely. And we thought that we were able to manage it. And there were so many things that were put in place to manage it. And the figures started going down.
That's right.
So the second wave could be likened to, okay, there was a pandemic. So a pandemic is that something has taken a worldwide scale, not only in a corner or section of the world, but all over the world. And historically, it's shown that pandemic, especially viral pandemic, it mutates, it comes back. So that is what has exactly happened, that this virus came here, we were able to battle it to a very large extent, but it did not completely go away. And our borders were open. International travel came back, and in societies where most of our people travel to come back from, the extent of the infection was high, and it remained high. But we also lowered our guard. So what has happened in simple terms is that when the virus came back, because we had relaxed, we had closed some of the isolation centers, we have disbanded this surveillance team, the tracing that was responsible for tracing, especially among communities. We are caught unawares again as a country. So in simple terms, the second wave can be clearly described as the virus that came here, we are all scared for, which we had a lockdown, came back again more ferociously. But sadly, before I pause, sadly is that whenever a society goes through a particular unpleasant experience, there should be lessons learned. There should be mitigants put in place to mitigate it getting out of hand or coming back in a way that even if a military team, you're fighting, and you went through a particular war, you figure out what can we do to mitigate against a reoccurrence. We did not deploy that.
Just last night, 749 new cases were reported. Lagos still holding its first position with 299 new infections, followed by Plateau. Ekiti is bottom on that list with only one confirmed case yesterday. So put it together, it's 5,560 confirmed cases in Nigeria. Over 71,000 have been discharged. Unfortunately, we've lost 1,267 people to COVID-19 complications. I am concerned about how much testing we have done as a country. The goal was that by June, July, we would have done 2 million. We're still far below 1 million.
900 and something.
As we speak right now. What is the implication of not testing enough? Because if we have only done roughly 1 million in a population that has been estimated to be 200 million, what's the implication of that on this pandemic and on this infection? Or transmission, rather?
It has severe consequences and implications. I listened to the Presidential Task Force saying that at the beginning of this fight, we had 2 testing centers. Now we have 90. And most of those locations are not being optimally utilized. A place like Ibadan has capacity for 1,000 tests per day. Less than 50-something, or less than 100, so to say, actually go there for testing. And then there's also the orientation. I have been tested. I voluntarily went for testing in May. And thank God it was negative.
Okay.
But one thing many do not know is that the communication, the way and manner those who are the stakeholders or those who are driving this fight are communicating does not connect with the grassroots, does not connect with Nigerians. Again, I come back, why are people not presenting themselves for testing? People have seen so many things that those, especially political leaders, have done that suggest that the coronavirus is not here. That's the view people have. And most of that is driven by distrust. There's very little or no trust between the people and those who lead us. And there must be specific confidence-building measures that would give people conviction. Because all the figures you saw there, most of them are coming from international travelers, either those who are inbound or going out.
Unfortunately, trust is built over time. Do we have enough time to
the reality
to
now
address
is that
the issue of
we
trust?
have an emergency that, so, okay, this is where the lessons learned, and we need to recalibrate.
Absolutely.
Let's see, if a political leader, let's say in the National Assembly, in the executive, someone sees, last week, over the weekend, we got a feedback from NMA president, Nigerian Medical Association, that 20 medical doctors died in 1 week from coronavirus. Typically, it means that this thing goes beyond the manner we are treating with levity. So it requires a war room kind of structure that will ensure you deploy people to communicate as a government or those in authority. Just imagine that, we had that so number of doctors died. Each member of the legislature in the parliament, I'm putting 200,000 down. I'm putting 100,000 down across both federal, even maybe lower figure than that at the state. We want to buy PPE. That is possible that they don't have enough PPE to ensure that they are protected to engage in this fight. One, they would have succeeded in winning the trust of the medical personnel. If some of the medical personnel put their lives at risk, they are the frontliners, as there is always said, that the combatants. And they see that perhaps before now, the issue about welfare was an issue. And the government takes that, it's okay, let's deploy more resources to ensure that if it's hazard allowance and other benefits, that will incentivize them. Government deploys more resources. One, they would have won that sector, medical personnel and other health professionals. And that would build trust. And those ones can be instruments to reach out to other people in the grassroots. But of course, we also recognize that there have been concerns about would there be a lockdown or not. So what it means is that if the previous dispensation was mismanaged, whether the palliatives were meant to be complete before they are distributed or they are doing it at the same time or not, as we speak, many do not trust that the feedback, whether it's from Kakovic or from government, is in line with the perception of the grassroots. So you take some steps that even you don't wait until there's a lockdown. There are specific welfare schemes that you introduce. Okay, because of the second wave, A, B, C, D, whether it is in the area of energy or other things, you demonstrate that you really care about the people. That we are all human beings. You're in politics or your political power, but we care. So you begin to see people feel, this thing is real. Let me go forward for testing. Rather than hearing that, this so figure died, this figure died, this person died. We must, and now the tragedy is that this super spreader weekend, between 2 weeks ago and this week, a lot of parties and traveling and mingling have taken place, of course, even with the ID card mingling. So there has been prediction that January will be disastrous. And do we have capacity to manage emergencies that we have seen in places like Switzerland, Denmark, in Sweden or Belgium, where at a point their ICU was overstretched, they couldn't take more. We don't have 1% capacity, but we must do certain things to avoid getting to that point.
So this gloomy prediction about January is perhaps what will even inspire Nigerians to go to churches and mosques to pray over the new year. They've had a very difficult 2020, and we're very religious people. So we are told now that the crossover services, have been cancelled in some states. I think CAN is asking that all services should end by 11 p.m. The Lagos State government has shut down recreational centers. Given what we saw during Christmas, it didn't look like many people have taken this very seriously. And somehow I understand how challenging the year has been. And this is perhaps the first Utah season that in this generation will be lived within such, virus restriction. But what is the role of the people in this case? For instance, in less than 48 hours, people are expected to go to religious centers to usher in the new year. What will you expect people to do?
Okay, we'll come from the standpoint that there are things government need to do. But there are things that are important for people to do to stay alive. Because, your life is not dependent on a particular political leader. He will come and go. He may do 4 years or 8 years and go away. That's right. But you have a role to play. Coming back to the question, during the lockdown, there were important celebrations. The Christian community in Nigeria had the Easter celebration. And it's one of the, apparently the most important celebration in Christendom. And because there was a lockdown, nobody stepped out, nobody went to the church. We're a praying nation. It's a very pleasant virtue. We recognize that many would like to be in the church or the religious building on the eve of the new year. And that's a very great feeling. But we also recognize that God answers prayer everywhere, and God sees the genuineness of our hearts. So if you, on the strength of not exposing, even if you're not infected, there may be somebody who is asymptomatic who is in that service. You may, for the sake of protecting the other person, because I still made reference some times ago that Dr. Kunjiwala said that if there is one person in the world who is still infected with coronavirus, the whole of humanity is at risk. So if you're the only person that goes to that church, but you probably have that infection, and the rest do not, you are likely going to contaminate others. So I'm not saying that there will be a blanket ban, but if it is not most essential or very, very fundamental, you can still go on your knees, pour out your heart to God. He will hear you, and you have more opportunity of crossover service in subsequent years. By then, this virus has blown over. And
there's also the alternative of virtual experience that 2020 has taught us.
Excellent.
That you can be in a place and not be there physically.
True.
And just enjoy the experience.
Yes.
I hope that people are listening and paying attention. But let's take a caller very quickly. Yakub has called in from Dokwemu. Good morning, Yakub.
Thank you, Nifemi, and then good morning to your guest.
Thank you.
Nifemi, all what I can say this morning is that God Almighty has just been kind to us, especially here in Nigerians. Because while saying that, I said yesterday that maybe you have passed through some market. I don't know, maybe you remember. Because passing through a major market, especially Lagos State and Ogun State, as I said yesterday, you live in Nifemi. It is only God that is even keeping saving us. Because, and then I noticed something, very quickly. It's like a lot of people have this. Yes. Because we are not doing the test enough. That's number one. A lot of people have it that they don't even know. They thought it's just ordinary malaria, they use malaria drug, and then they are okay. Another thing I want to add quickly is that I want Nigerian government to try as much as possible wherever they can get that money from, because we told that we don't have money to purchase that vaccine. They should please, even those money they recover from the looters, they should use it for ordinary citizens in Nigeria to get the vaccine, so that you can be able to say, yes, I've already taken the vaccine, and then we'll be okay. But failure to give us that, I don't think they are doing us any good. Thank you and good morning, sir.
Thank you, Yakub, for your contribution. So it's one thing to get money for the vaccine. It's another thing entirely to get people to take shots of it, given the conspiracy theories, many of them that has been built around some would say that cancer has been with us for many years. How come there hasn't been a vaccine for cancer or for, a sickness like malaria, and then within a year we got a vaccine for COVID-19? It does appear that after when we get a vaccine, we still have a lot to do to scientifically prove to our people that these shots are safe.
It's important to note that the vaccine will not be here earlier than the next 3-4 weeks. The timeline for this sickness to infect and kill sometimes could be, most times it's not more than 14 days. So let's note that. And then the vaccine is for prevention. It's not a curative.
Okay.
So we have always, even in the US has over 350,000 people who are dead, even though they've started administering the vaccine. And even when the vaccine comes, to get to the grassroots would probably take a longer time. So the best step is to protect yourself from getting infected in the first place. And I also want to charge the private sector. They will be the biggest losers if they don't get involved, if they go beyond the donation channel. They need to work with the government, put in place a communication strategy. Yesterday, for instance, I saw a documentary at TVC showed that captured those who were selling fake certificates, COVID-19 certificate. Yes. Those are ways of mass enlightenment. But I am also aware that over 60% of Nigerians don't have access to watch TVC. So the private sector, one must deploy resources to have more people wearing their mask. The caller just mentioned it, that over 89% or more of Nigerians are not interested in wearing a mask. So some don't have the resources to have the mask. So the private sector must get involved and look for credible social players. That's apparently our organization, for instance.
That's right.
We saw that there was a very critical gap in PPE. Because even as we speak now, I am not certain that health workers have enough PPE to embark on this prediction.
We have to leave it there. So remember to avoid crowded places. Go everywhere with your sanitizer. And we have a face mask here. Perhaps I should just show you how to wear it.
Yes. The blue one should be
outside.
Right?
And you cover everything like this, not under your jaw. Pascal Achune.
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming. Executive Director, Health Emergency Initiative. That's our show today. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be New Year's Eve, right? And it promises to be an exciting time on TV. Do join us again. I am Nifemi Okuntoye. Bye for now. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you.
It's my pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate that too.
Wherever the big news story